Hi, I'm Patrick. In this episode, I'm talking about the worst Karen deaths ever recorded. From a Karen who live-streamed herself eating a highly toxic fish, to another who tried to poison a colony of feral cats, only to have it backfire on her in the dumbest way imaginable.
It was September 2017 in Horry County, South Carolina. The evening was warm, clear enough to keep the windows open, and somewhere in a residential kitchen, a phone was propped on a cutting board with a ring light aimed at the counter. A live stream was already running, and the comment section had started filling up almost immediately. And I want you to hold that detail because it becomes important later. Deborah Lynn Coulter was 43, a stay-at-home property owner with no culinary training and no background in food science or toxicology. What she did have was a reputation in her neighborhood for filing complaints. Noise violation, exotic animal ordinances, anything she believed warranted official attention. I mention that not to reduce her to it, but because it's part of understanding why a Brave Foods challenge was the kind of thing she wanted to do on camera. She had something to prove about her own nerve, and she'd been promoting the stream for days. The fish she purchased was a fresh pufferfish from a private online seller, with no certification or preparation guidance. The listing described the fish as pre-clean. Based on what investigators found in that kitchen, it wasn't. And here's the thing I kept coming back to. You can find the basic facts about pufferfish toxicity in about 4 minutes online. Tetrodotoxin is concentrated in the liver, the skin, the ovaries, and the intestines. Licensed fugu chefs train for years to remove those organs without contaminating the flesh. That information is not buried. It is not technical. It is the first thing that comes up. I don't know what Deborah read before she bought the fish, but based on what she did next, it wasn't that. She began preparation on camera without removing the internal organs first. Her knife passed through the body cavity. Within the first 20 minutes, she ate a portion of the flesh. Nothing happened immediately, and I think that's one of the cruelest things about tetrodotoxin. It doesn't announce itself right away. It gives you just enough time to feel like you were right. The comment section was already filling with warnings. The messages were not vague. People were being specific, naming the toxin, explaining exactly why what she was doing was dangerous. Deborah read several of them on camera, dismissed them, and began blocking users. That's the detail I keep coming back to. More than the fish, more than the preparation, the blocking. Because those weren't trolls. Those were people who knew something she didn't, trying to reach her in real time, and she treated it like interference. Around the 25-minute mark, the recording shows her describing numbness in her lips, framing it as the fish being intense rather than anything wrong, still performing. And I have to be honest, that part is hard to sit with because you can see exactly where this is going, and she clearly cannot. By the 30-minute mark, her speech had slurred, and she set her fork down. A glass came off the counter around the 35-minute mark. She didn't catch it. By the 45-minute mark, the camera was still running, but Deborah was no longer visible, and there was no more sound. I want to be precise about what tetrodotoxin does because it matters for understanding how narrow the window for survival actually is. TTX blocks the nerve signals that tell your muscles to contract, including the diaphragm, which controls breathing. There is no antidote. The only intervention is ventilatory support started before respiratory failure sets in, and without rapid medical intervention, survival becomes unlikely. Deborah was alone in her kitchen. Nobody in that comment section could do anything except watch. A viewer contacted emergency services after the stream had been silent for several minutes. Responders found Deborah unresponsive, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause was confirmed as tetrodotoxin poisoning leading to respiratory failure. The recording was preserved before the platform removed it. Purchase records from the vendor were recovered. No criminal liability was assigned. The purchase was made willingly from an unregulated source. I've thought about that more than I expected to. Nobody was charged. A vendor with no certification sold a product with no preparation guidelines and walked away clean. That's how the case closed. It was September 2015, and the dense canopy of a West Virginia state forest filtered the late morning sunlight into scattered patches on the forest floor. The air carried the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and damp soil, typical of the region's humid autumn climate. A well-maintained trail wound through towering oak and maple trees, marked with occasional wooden signs warning hikers about various forest hazards. Delilah Frey, a 52-year-old online reseller who specialized in natural products, had joined a small hiking group exploring the area's diverse ecosystem. Her dismissive attitude toward authority and argumentative nature had already created tension with the volunteer trail guide. Delilah prided herself on her self-taught knowledge of wilderness survival, gleaned primarily from internet forums and amateur foraging websites. The group had stopped near a rotting log approximately 3 miles from the trailhead when Delilah spotted a cluster of white-capped mushrooms growing in the rich soil. The volunteer guide immediately cautioned against touching any wild fungi, pointing to posted warnings about toxic species common to the area. Delilah scoffed at the advice, accusing the guide of unnecessary fear-mongering and claiming that mainstream experts deliberately suppressed traditional foraging knowledge. Despite multiple warnings from both the guide and other hikers, Delilah picked one of the larger specimens and examined it closely. She insisted her online research had taught her to identify edible varieties, dismissing the guide's formal training in mycology and years of field experience. The mushroom appeared pristine, with a clean white cap and sturdy stem that matched descriptions from various foraging websites she considered authoritative. Despite the warnings, Delilah broke off a large portion of the mushroom and ate it raw, insisting that a small sample posed no risk, chewing it thoroughly while maintaining eye contact with the concerned guide. She refused suggestions to seek immediate medical attention, claiming that her body could handle any mild digestive upset. The group reluctantly continued their hike, with several members expressing discomfort. The initial hours passed without incident as the group completed their planned route and returned to the parking area. Delilah showed no immediate symptoms and appeared vindicated. However, approximately 8 to 12 hours after ingestion, severe gastrointestinal distress began late that evening. Violent vomiting and diarrhea forced her to pull over multiple times during her drive home. The symptoms intensified throughout the night, but Delilah experienced a temporary improvement the following morning that gave her false hope. This brief respite masked the progressive liver damage occurring internally. By the second day, her condition deteriorated rapidly as organ failure accelerated. Family members found Delilah disoriented and jaundiced in her home and immediately transported her to a small rural emergency department. By the second day, she became increasingly confused as hepatic encephalopathy set in, followed by seizures as her liver function collapsed. The small rural facility lacked specialized equipment for advanced toxicology treatment. Despite emergency efforts to stabilize her condition, Delilah suffered cardiac arrest within 48 to 72 hours of consuming the mushroom. Resuscitation attempts failed, and she was pronounced dead at the clinic. The rapid progression from apparent recovery to complete organ failure followed the classic pattern of severe mushroom poisoning. Subsequent toxicological analysis confirmed the presence of amatoxins, deadly compounds found in several wild mushroom species native to West Virginia forests. Investigators documented witness statements from the hiking group, including the volunteer guide's warnings and Delilah's deliberate consumption despite posted safety notices. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental poisoning, emphasizing that the victim had ignored multiple warnings from qualified personnel. It was November 22, 2017. The dusty roads of Córdoba province in Argentina stretched endlessly under the Argentine sun, their isolation hiding dangers that would claim a life before sunset. Marie Kowalski, 42, had relocated from Minneapolis 6 months earlier, seeking a fresh start after a series of road rage incidents had cost her employment at a regional insurance firm. Her Minnesota driving record showed multiple citations for aggressive driving and a restraining order from a driver she had pursued home on 2 separate occasions. Her relatives recalled she viewed confrontations behind the wheel as tests of principle, rarely considering the risk of escalation. Her move to Argentina had not changed her fundamental approach to driving conflicts. Local residents and neighbors noted several tense encounters she'd had in the preceding months, with minor horn-honking disputes and gestures that never escalated into physical violence but drew wary stares. Language barriers had prevented full escalation, leaving Marie frustrated and increasingly insistent that others understand her position. On the day of the incident, Marie believed a motorcyclist had cut her off at a rural intersection outside the city. The perceived slight triggered her familiar pattern of pursuit, following the rider for approximately 12 miles through increasingly remote countryside. Her dashboard camera captured her voice, growing more agitated as she narrated her grievances, convinced the motorcyclist needed to be confronted about his dangerous driving. The motorcyclist, unaware of Marie's intentions, said that he simply continued toward his home along the isolated dirt road. When he turned into his property's long driveway, Marie followed without hesitation. Her dash cam recorded her parking behind his motorcycle, effectively blocking his exit route. She immediately exited her vehicle and began walking toward him, shouting in broken Spanish about his driving, mispronouncing words, and mixing English phrases in a way investigators later said likely worsened confusion and made her intent harder to interpret. The homeowner retreated toward his garage, repeatedly gesturing for Marie to leave his property. Marie ignored his warnings, continuing to advance while pointing accusingly and raising her voice. Her fragmented Spanish and failure to respond to his shouted commands appeared to be interpreted as refusal rather than misunderstanding, increasing his visible agitation. The dashboard camera captured her stepping closer despite his obvious distress and defensive posture, though the camera's fixed forward angle limited clear visibility once she moved fully out of frame. As Marie moved to within a few feet, the motorcyclist drew a legally registered handgun possessed under a valid provincial firearms authorization, again ordering her to stop. Investigators later noted that he remained positioned near the garage entrance with limited retreat options. The camera recorded Marie shouting defiantly and taking another step forward just before a single gunshot echoed across the property. She collapsed immediately beside her vehicle. The homeowner placed an emergency call shortly after the shooting, but the nearest hospital was approximately 45 minutes away. Paramedics arrived roughly 53 minutes after the shooting, finding Marie had already succumbed to her injuries. The dashboard camera provided a continuous visual and audio record of the pursuit and confrontation. Though not every movement was fully visible, the autopsy revealed a single gunshot wound to the chest, causing massive internal bleeding and lung collapse. Death occurred within minutes from blood loss and respiratory failure, with injuries determined to be rapidly fatal. Provincial authorities reviewed the dashboard footage, witness statements, and ballistic evidence and conducted a formal prosecutorial review before ruling the shooting justified self-defense under Argentine law weeks later. Marie's body was repatriated to Minnesota, where a small funeral service was held for family members. It was August 21st, 2016. The suburban rail station in northern Illinois was crowded on a late weeknight. The platform stretched approximately 300 feet along the tracks, lit by overhead fluorescent fixtures. A service delay had been announced 20 minutes earlier, causing passengers to cluster near the benches. Audible announcements echoed through mounted speakers, warning of an inbound train. Rhea Cole was 47 years old. She worked as a rideshare driver, spending most evenings navigating the city and suburbs. Friends described her as someone who believed rules were suggestions for other people. Earlier that evening, she had approached the station attendant, demanding to know why the delay wasn't being fixed faster. When told that mechanical issues required time to resolve safely, Rhea had gestured dismissively and muttered about incompetent transit workers. That night, she had parked near the station to pick up a fare. The passenger had texted that they were waiting on the opposite platform. Rhea stood near the edge of the southbound platform, looking across the tracks. The overpass would require walking the length of the platform, climbing stairs, crossing, and descending on the other side. She checked her phone. The fare was waiting. The announcement system repeated its warning. An inbound train was approaching on the northbound track. Rhea glanced toward the sound, but saw no headlight yet. She stepped off the platform onto the ballast, the loose stones crunching under her shoes. Several passengers noticed her. A woman near the platform edge called out a warning. Rhea looked back and made a dismissive hand gesture. An older man pointed toward the approaching train and shouted more urgently. Rhea shook her head and continued walking, her posture suggesting she found their panic overblown. She crossed the first rail and continued toward the opposite platform. The train's headlight became visible around the curve. The horn sounded, a long, sustained blast. Rhea quickened her pace, but maintained her confident stride, as though the warning was meant for someone else. She reached the far rail and placed one hand on the edge of the northbound platform. The train was traveling at a speed estimated between 40 and 50 miles per hour. Rhea attempted to pull herself up. Her foot slipped on the loose ballast. She lost her grip. The corner of the train's cab and pilot struck her along the right shoulder and upper torso. The impact deflected her body violently sideways, imparting rotational force that sent her tumbling. Multiple ribs fractured. Her clavicle was shattered. She was thrown clear of the tracks, her body striking the ballast and rolling several feet before coming to rest. The train's emergency brakes engaged. Passengers on both platforms began shouting. Several dialed emergency services. Two men climbed down and approached Rhea's body. She was lying on her side, motionless. Blood pooled beneath her. Her eyes were closed. No breathing was visible. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes. Paramedics confirmed massive blunt force trauma. The injuries were unsurvivable. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The train operator provided a statement to transit police, confirming the horn had been sounded and emergency braking initiated immediately. Investigators reviewed footage from station cameras and passenger videos. The recording showed Rhea dismissing multiple warnings before stepping onto the tracks, despite the audible warning and visible train approach. The county medical examiner listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries sustained in a train strike. The death was ruled accidental due to trespassing on active rail property. Service resumed approximately 3 hours later. It was July 15, 2019, at a large, colorful hot spring in a major national park. Steam rose from near boiling pools, surrounded by vivid orange and yellow bacterial mats, and wooden boardwalks threaded through the area, crowded with tourists. Signs warned visitors of fragile crusts that could collapse into scalding water, and rangers patrolled to monitor safety. Evelyn Carrington, 47, had built her life around ambition and control. A high-powered real estate agent specializing in luxury properties, she rarely took vacations without her phone and expected the world to bend to her will. She drove a sleek white SUV with a vanity plate reading Soldit and believed rules applied only to others, while her tax contributions entitled her to special privileges. Her husband stayed at a nearby rental to golf, leaving Evelyn to supervise their 2 teenage children, who were embarrassed by her loud, confrontational behavior. Wearing pristine designer hiking boots and carrying a high-end camera she barely knew how to operate, Evelyn approached the hot spring, confident she could navigate both nature and protocol on her own terms. The park's boardwalks were designed to protect visitors and preserve the fragile thermal ecosystem beneath. The spring itself stretched more than 350 feet across, with water temperatures capable of causing third-degree burns in seconds. Multiple warning signs indicated the danger of stepping off the walkways, noting that the colorful bacterial mats covered fragile mineral crusts. Rangers carried specialized rescue equipment, trained to respond quickly to any thermal emergency. The confrontation began when a ranger noticed Evelyn's 14-year-old daughter stepping onto the bacterial mat to take a photo. Evelyn immediately challenged the ranger, insisting that her family deserved broader access and ignoring repeated requests to return to the boardwalk. She approached aggressively, gesturing with her camera, while nearby tourists filmed the escalating encounter. Spotting what she considered the perfect photo opportunity, Evelyn moved toward a section where the boardwalk curved away from the water's edge, leaving roughly 8 feet of bacterial mat between her and the boiling pool. She ignored the nearby rangers' repeated warnings and stepped over the safety rope, confident the surface beneath her boots was solid. The brilliant orange and yellow mats glistened in the morning sun, giving the illusion of stability, but beneath them lay a dangerously thin mineral crust. Each step she took made a faint cracking sound that went unnoticed amid the chatter of other tourists. After only a few steps, the crust suddenly gave way beneath her left foot. Evelyn plunged thigh-deep into the scalding water, the heat immediately searing her skin. Instinctively, she reached out with her hands to try and pull herself up, but the water burned her wrists and forearms almost instantly, sending her into shock. Pain and thermal shock overwhelmed her senses, and within seconds, she lost consciousness, her body floating face down. Emergency medical teams airlifted Evelyn to a regional medical center, where she was pronounced dead. The coroner determined drowning secondary to thermal shock as the cause of death, with massive burns contributing. Her core body temperature had spiked dangerously, and the thermal water had caused immediate loss of consciousness, preventing self-rescue. Survival was impossible under the circumstances. Evelyn's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the park, claiming insufficient safety measures. The case was dismissed after video evidence clearly showed her deliberate disregard for warnings and safety protocols. The incident prompted park authorities to enhance safety measures around thermal areas, adding extra signage and barriers to prevent similar tragedies. It was June 11th, 2015, in Boca Raton, Florida. The afternoon shift at the Salon on Palmetto Park Road was running the way it always did on a weekday. Every station occupied, dryers humming, conversations layered over each other across the room. The schedule was tight, and the staff had learned to move through it without much margin for anything unexpected. Denise Halpern, 55, was a real estate agent who had been selling properties in Boca for 12 years. She was good at her job, and she knew it. Colleagues described her as sharp, driven, and used to getting things done on her terms. That evening, she had one of the biggest open house showings of her quarter, a 4-bedroom waterfront property that had been sitting on the market for 2 months. She had spent the week preparing the listing, arranging staging furniture, and sending personal invitations to her top buyer contacts. First impressions mattered at a showing like this, and she intended to walk through that door, looking like someone who had everything under control. She had called ahead and booked a last-minute blowout, arriving at the salon at 4:10 in a cream blazer with her phone already in her hand and 45 minutes built into her schedule before she needed to leave. The receptionist told her there was a 20-minute delay. The previous appointment had run over and her stylist was finishing up. Denise did not sit down. She asked why a booked appointment was being pushed back for someone who had gone over their time. The receptionist explained that the previous client had arrived late and the schedule had shifted. Denise said that was not her problem. She had a showing at 7, and she had booked specifically to have enough time. The receptionist said the stylist would be with her as soon as possible. Denise asked to speak with the manager. The manager came out and offered the same explanation. Denise said she understood the explanation and did not find it acceptable. A stylist working the next station over offered a compromise, suggesting she could begin the blowout while finishing the last steps of her current client. Denise agreed, though she made clear she expected the full service and expected it done properly. The blowout began. Within a few minutes, Denise was directing the process. She told the stylist the sectioning was wrong. She said the dryer felt too cold and was taking too long. The stylist explained the heat setting and said increasing it further risked damaging the hair. Denise said she had been getting blowouts for 20 years and she knew what her hair could handle. She reached up and adjusted the dryer controls herself, pushing the heat higher. The stylist moved her hand away from the controls and reset them. Denise adjusted them again. The stylist stopped working for a moment and said calmly that if the settings were changed again, she would not be able to continue the service safely. Denise told her to keep going. Because of the constant adjustments and interruptions, the stylist had to reposition her setup to keep working, running a temporary extension cord from a nearby station. It passed behind the chair, close to where Denise had been shifting throughout the appointment. It was not part of the usual setup, but it allowed the service to continue under the conditions Denise insisted on. Denise's phone rang. She answered it and stepped back from the chair while talking, still complaining about the delay. She was moving without looking, distracted and mid-conversation. Her heel caught the extension cord. She lurched backward and reached for the chair, but missed. There was no break in the fall. Her full weight carried straight back, and the back of her head struck the lower metal frame behind her. The sound cut through the noise of the salon. Staff called 911 immediately. Denise was conscious, but disoriented when paramedics arrived. Imaging confirmed a severe traumatic brain injury from the direct impact. She was admitted to intensive care and died 3 days later without regaining full consciousness. Unfortunately, she never made it to the house showing. Investigators classified the incident as an accidental fall involving environmental obstruction and active client interference during the service. The incident was ruled accidental. It was November 17th, 2016, in Amarillo, Texas. A cold front had pushed through the panhandle that afternoon, dropping temperatures into the low 40s. By early evening, a neighborhood supermarket glowed under fluorescent lighting as employees prepared for closing. Brenda Harlow, 47, arrived shortly after sunset to pick up groceries for the week. She lived in a gated subdivision and served on her homeowners association board. Former co-workers described her as organized and persistent, especially when challenging policies she believed were flexible. In retail settings, she often escalated minor inconveniences into formal complaints. That evening, she wore a thick winter coat, leggings, and open-toed sandals. While selecting frozen vegetable and packaged meals, she fixated on glare, reflecting off the glass doors, and loudly accused the store of misleading presentation because she could not clearly read labels. A clerk explained that extra stock was kept in a staff-only walk-in freezer. Brenda demanded access, insisting she had a right to inspect unopened cases herself and threatening to contact corporate. The shift supervisor refused, citing safety rules and liability. Brenda photographed his name tag and announced she would report the store for unsafe customer conditions. Moments later, as an employee pushed a pallet jack through the stockroom doors, Brenda slipped in behind him without authorization. Surveillance later confirmed she entered the restricted area alone. The walk-in freezer measured roughly 12 by 14 feet and operated at about -5 degrees Fahrenheit. The insulated door was self-closing and equipped with a required interior safety release designed to open from the inside. Several large boxes had been stacked near the doorway, partially limiting clear access to the release plate. After the door sealed shut, Brenda turned and struck it with her palm. She reached for the interior release, but had to maneuver around the stacked boxes to apply pressure. As she shifted her footing, frost near the threshold caused her sandal to slip. She fell backward and struck the back of her head against a metal storage rack. Surveillance footage showed her sitting upright for nearly a minute before standing unsteadily. She reached again for the release. Without gloves, her exposed hands struggled to maintain sustained pressure while repositioning around the boxes. Twice, she appeared to press the mechanism, but did not hold it long enough to disengage the latch. Investigators later confirmed the release functioned properly when unobstructed and fully depressed. Over the next hour, her movements became slower and less coordinated. Investigators later noted that prolonged exposure at that temperature would steadily impair coordination and judgment. Combined with the earlier head injury, her ability to operate the release mechanism likely deteriorated. She alternated between attempts to stand and periods seated against the shelving, remaining in contact with the cold concrete floor. Nearly 2 hours after entry, surveillance showed her lowering to the floor within a few feet of the door and remaining there. By the time an overnight stalker entered more than 2 hours after she went inside, Brenda was unresponsive. Emergency responders pronounced her dead at the scene. During autopsy, the medical examiner documented a 2-inch scalp laceration and findings consistent with a mild concussion. The injury was not fatal, but was determined to have contributed to temporary disorientation and slowed reaction time during the exposure. The official report listed accidental hypothermia as the cause of death, with head injury noted as a contributing factor. Core temperature in the low 80s Fahrenheit was consistent with prolonged exposure. Store management later received a safety citation for partially obstructing the interior release and improper storage. No criminal charges were filed.
It was September 3rd, 2016. The afternoon sun beat down on a private hiking trail near Sedona, casting sharp shadows across the red rock formations. Linda Ravine, a 44-year-old real estate in the Verde Valley, was at the edge of a steep ravine, her attention fixed on stray dog wandering near the sandstone cliff edge. Linda had built a successful career selling residential properties throughout the Verde Valley, known equally for her persistence and her habit of inserting herself into situations uninvited. Colleagues at her brokerage described her as someone who genuinely believed was helping, even when explicitly told to stop. Friends and family saw a pattern of public confrontations with strangers she deemed irresponsible, from parking violations to dog owners she felt weren't controlling their pets properly. The ravine system near Sedona features steep canyon walls composed of layers of weathered sandstone and limestone, carved over millennia by seasonal water flow. The rock formations are notoriously unstable, particularly along cliff edges where thin, undercut veneers of sandstone and loose sediment create deceptive footing. Park officials had posted multiple warnings about the specific trail Linda was hiking, noting recent rock slides and deteriorating path edges. The area's jagged rock formations, some jutting up like natural spears from the canyon floor, made any fall potentially catastrophic. That afternoon, Linda encountered a group of local hikers who regularly fed the stray dog. When Red wandered near the ravine edge, approximately 30 feet from the trail, Linda immediately announced she would rescue it. The locals insisted the dog navigated the terrain regularly and would return on its own. Linda responded by loudly criticizing them for their negligence, calling them irresponsible for allowing a dog near dangerous terrain. When they warned her about the unstable sandstone layer extending 10 feet from the visible cliff edge, she dismissed their concerns entirely. Multiple hikers attempted to physically stop her, but Linda pushed past them, focused solely on reaching the dog. She stepped beyond the warning markers, moving across loose rock that shifted visibly beneath her boots. The dog, sensing her approach, moved closer to the ravine edge. Linda followed, now 25 feet from stable ground, standing on a section of trail that had been marked as structurally compromised just weeks earlier. A dry crack ran along the ledge as she advanced. The sandstone gave way. Linda's right foot punched through the surface layer, destabilizing the entire section of cliff edge. She grabbed for Red instinctively as she fell, both tumbling 25 feet into the narrow canyon below, rotating in the air and striking the rock floor. Linda landed on top of Red, both bodies impacting a cluster of jagged limestone formations. Multiple rock spires gouged her clothing and caused deep lacerations with heavy bleeding. Witnesses at the rim saw her still form and torn clothing. Blood spread rapidly across the pale rock as her body convulsed briefly before going still. One hiker immediately called emergency services while others descended using established routes. First responders arrived within 35 minutes but could not access the ravine floor safely. Rescue teams rigged a lowering because the ravine was too narrow, and rescue teams confirmed that both Linda and Red had died on the autopsy. Multiple penetrating injuries to thoracoabdominal organs and rapid exsanguination, consistent with blunt force trauma, compression pinned against rock. Trail access was temporarily closed, while Sedona Park officials reinforced warning signage. The incident circulated widely on regional hiking as an example of ignoring local experts and posted warnings.
It was May 17, 2014. The narrow streets of Shibuya, Tokyo hummed with midday delivery traffic as Lynn Cameron stepped out of a convenience store, already irritated by the scooters weaving past pedestrians on the crowded sidewalk. Lynn was a 41-year-old English tutor from Manchester who had lived in Tokyo for 8 years, building a modest client base teaching conversational English to business professionals. Friends described her as competent but combative, someone who had learned just enough Japanese to argue with strangers over minor infractions. Colleagues at the language school where she taught part-time mentioned she had been reprimanded twice for confrontations with building security over access procedures. That morning, Lynn had already posted 2 photos to social media showing delivery scooters parked near building entrances, captioned with complaints about obstruction. Drivers for courier services worked under extreme time pressure, making dozens of stops per hour while maneuvering 550-pound scooters loaded with cargo boxes, secured by bungee straps, and brackets through spaces barely 4 feet wide. Co-workers later recalled her mentioning plans to confront the next driver she saw violating what she believed were parking regulations. The intersection near the convenience store was a known congestion point where delivery drivers regularly paused to check addresses before continuing their routes. No official pedestrian barricades or crossing signals were installed at this exact curb cut. At 12:43 in the afternoon, a courier on a delivery scooter slowed near the curb, checking his navigation screen while balancing the loaded cargo box mounted behind his seat. Lynn emerged from the store, immediately spotting what she perceived as another violation. Witness accounts mentioned her walking directly toward the scooter as the driver prepared to accelerate back into traffic. She stepped off the sidewalk into the narrow street, positioning herself directly in the scooter's path while raising her phone to record. The driver saw Lynn step in front of him and immediately applied his brakes. The scooter's front wheel briefly lost traction under emergency braking, causing the vehicle to swerve slightly right. Lynn continued advancing, phone raised, demanding the driver stop and provide identification. She was less than 3 feet from the front wheel when the driver's emergency braking caused the heavily loaded cargo box to swing outward on its mounting bracket, which investigators later noted had measurable lateral play. The unsecured corner of the box, a sharp aluminum edge, made contact first. The scooter's mirror setup did not cover the immediate close-range blind zone directly in front of the vehicle. The metal corner of the cargo box, carrying approximately 40 pounds of packages, struck Lynn's left hip with enough force to spin her body counterclockwise. Her feet tangled as momentum carried her backward. She fell with her arms still extended, holding her phone forward, unable to break her fall. The impact of her head on the curb was accentuated by a slight slope in the street pavement, and the curb's edge had a chipped section with exposed reinforcement visible in the concrete. The back of her head struck the concrete curb with what witnesses described as a sound like wood splitting. Her phone clattered across the pavement, camera still recording the sky. Lynn's body went immediately rigid, then slack. She never moved again. The driver dismounted and signaled for assistance as bystanders called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Lynn unresponsive with severe head trauma. Hospital imaging confirmed a basilar skull fracture and cerebral edema. She died the next day. Investigators noted the curb lacked pedestrian control barriers. The investigation concluded within a week. Witness accounts detailed that Lynn deliberately stepped into the vehicle's path. Her phone, recovered from the scene, contained 47 seconds of footage showing her approach and the moment of impact before the device fell. The footage was entered into court records but never released publicly. The driver faced no charges and returned to work after providing testimony. It was November 2016, and a cold front had settled over Gary, Indiana, bringing temperatures down to the mid-30s with intermittent sleet that made surfaces treacherous. The industrial landscape was dotted with active rail lines that carried freight trains through the heart of the Rust Belt city. At a particular crossing, red warning lights flashed rhythmically as the automated gate arm lowered to block vehicular traffic. Corinne Wild, a 49-year-old warehouse supervisor known for her aggressive temperament and confrontational attitude toward delays, had been stuck behind the lowered gate for several minutes. Her impatient nature and history of verbal altercations with authority figures made her a difficult presence in most professional settings. The crossing's warning system had activated properly, with bells clanging and lights flashing to indicate an approaching freight train. The locomotive's horn sounded repeatedly as it approached the intersection, following standard safety protocols for urban crossings. Corinne exited her vehicle and approached the emergency communication box mounted near the gate mechanism. She began shouting into the intercom, demanding that operators raise the gate immediately and accusing them of deliberately wasting her time. A passenger in her vehicle urged her to return to the car and wait for the train to pass, but Corinne's frustration had escalated beyond reason. She kicked the gate arm repeatedly, causing it to shake on its mounting bracket. The warning lights continued their urgent flashing pattern, while the train's horn grew progressively louder. Despite the obvious danger signals and her passengers' continued pleas, Corinne stepped around the gate barrier and onto the gravel ballast that supported the railroad tracks. The uneven surface consisted of loose stones of varying sizes, creating an unstable walking platform that became even more treacherous in the sleet-dampened conditions. As Corinne attempted to step over the near rail, her foot caught on the irregular ballast stones. She stumbled forward, losing her balance on the slippery gravel surface. Her leg landed directly across the steel rail, just as the locomotive rounded the final curve before the crossing. The freight train, traveling within posted speed limits through the urban crossing, struck Corinne's lower body with devastating force. Her lower body sustained severe traumatic injuries upon impact. The force of the collision threw her torso clear of the tracks, but the damage had already been done. Death occurred within minutes due to massive internal bleeding and traumatic shock. The train's engineer initiated emergency braking immediately upon seeing her on the tracks, but the train required nearly a quarter mile to come to a complete stop. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the engineer's radio call to dispatch. Railroad investigators documented the scene thoroughly, noting the position of Corinne's vehicle, the functioning warning systems, and witness statements from her passenger. The locomotive's event recorder confirmed that all safety protocols had been followed, including proper horn signals and adherence to posted speed limits. Security cameras mounted at the intersection captured the entire sequence of events, showing Corinne's deliberate circumvention of the safety barriers and her subsequent fall onto the active tracks. The footage clearly demonstrated that the warning systems had been operating correctly. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, noting that the victim had trespassed on active railroad property despite functioning safety equipment and clear warning signals. The investigation concluded that Corinne's death resulted from her decision to ignore multiple safety warnings and enter a restricted area during active train operations. It was August 2015 in Lowndes County, Georgia. The late afternoon heat sat at 94 degrees Fahrenheit with the kind of humidity that makes the air feel like it has weight. The neighbor's property was a semi-rural lot set back from the road, partially fenced, with several large dogs kept in varying states of enclosure. It was the kind of property that looks different depending on who's looking at it, and Paula Dunmore had been looking at it closely and repeatedly for over 2 years. Paula Dunmore was 49, a retired county clerk, detail-oriented, persistent, and thorough in the way that people who spend careers managing official records tend to be. She had filed more than 20 formal complaints against her neighbor over that period, documenting what she believed was an unlicensed dog breeding operation running out of the property. Authorities had responded multiple times. Warnings had been issued. No animals had been removed and no operation had been shut down. I think most people in that situation would either accept the outcome or escalate through legal channels. Paula did neither. She started going over herself. She had begun conducting her own informal walkthroughs of the property, approaching unannounced, stepping past the fence line, photographing the kennels and counting animals. She brought a notepad and her phone. Nothing between her and the dogs except her certainty that she had every right to be there. The neighbor had asked her to stop on at least 2 separate occasions. She kept going. That afternoon, she stepped past the fence line again. An unsecured dog, vaccination history unknown and unverifiable, approached and bit her on the forearm. The wound was significant enough that she drove herself directly to the emergency room. I want to stop there for a second, because that decision was the right one. She didn't dismiss the bite. She didn't go home and wait it out. She went to the hospital. And that's what makes the next part so difficult to read. Intake staff documented the bite, noted the unknown vaccination status of the animal, and recommended immediate post-exposure prophylaxis. Because of high patient volume that day, she waited approximately 90 minutes without being formally seen by a physician. She left before treatment was administered, signing a form confirming she was leaving against medical advice. The intake record documented her stated reason. The weight was unacceptable, and she didn't believe the bite was serious enough to justify preventive treatment. Here's the thing about post-exposure prophylaxis for rabies that I didn't fully appreciate before researching this. The window it works in is the window before any symptoms appear. Once the virus reaches the central nervous system and clinical rabies begins, no treatment changes the outcome in any meaningful way. That's not a nuance buried in medical literature. It's the foundational fact of rabies exposure management. The treatment works when the virus is still traveling through the body toward the brain. Once it reaches that stage, survival becomes extremely unlikely. Paula left before the treatment started, and she left because she didn't want to wait. Roughly 6 weeks later, she developed fever, agitation, and difficulty sleeping. She returned to the hospital. By that visit, she was presenting with hydrophobia and confusion. Clinical rabies encephalitis had fully established. The dog was located, euthanized, and submitted for testing. Brain tissue examination confirmed a rabies-positive result. The incubation period was consistent with the bite location and the time elapsed. Paula died in hospital care within 10 days of her second admission. Confirmed cause was rabies encephalitis. The intake record from her first visit, including the form she signed on the way out, was recovered. Her complaint logs against the neighbor were also on file. Following her death, authorities conducted a full inspection of the property. Multiple animals were removed, and the operation was shut down. I've thought about that timing more than once. 2 years of complaints, and it took this to move it. I still don't know what to do with that.
It was October 2nd, 2017. The residential construction site sat on the outskirts of a developing subdivision in central Arizona. The afternoon sun beat down on exposed dirt and gravel. Framing for a 2-story home stood partially complete, with wooden studs rising against a cloudless sky. Extension ladders leaned against the structure. Orange warning tape stretched across the driveway entrance. The ground was uneven, covered in loose gravel, scattered lumber, and electrical wire. Workers moved between tasks across the lot.
Hallie Bates was 52 years old. She worked as a freelance property inspector, contracted by buyers to assess homes before purchase. Colleagues described her as thorough but impatient, often cutting corners to finish jobs quickly. That afternoon, she had arrived without notifying the construction crew. She was not authorized to be there. The property was weeks from completion. Hallie had been hired to inspect a neighboring home, but decided to examine this unfinished structure as well. She carried a clipboard and a digital camera. Hallie ducked under the warning tape and walked onto the site. A worker in a hard hat approached her, explaining that the site was restricted and asking if Hallie had clearance. Hallie barely looked up, dismissing the concern with a wave. She informed the worker that she was a licensed inspector and didn't require permission. The worker mentioned safety protocols. Hallie cut him off, stating that she knew construction sites better than most workers. She moved toward the rear, where a 24-foot aluminum extension ladder rested against the second-floor framing. The ladder sat on loose gravel with no stabilizing base or tie-off. Another worker called out, warning that the ladder hadn't been properly secured. Hallie ignored the shout entirely, positioning herself at the base. She tested the ladder briefly, then began climbing. The ladder swayed as she ascended. She reached approximately 18 feet. The base shifted laterally. The gravel offered no traction. Hallie's weight caused the ladder to slide. She leaned backward instinctively, trying to regain balance. The ladder continued moving. Hallie fell. Her body rotated as she dropped 18 feet. Her upper back and neck struck the sharp edge of the poured concrete foundation. The impact fractured her cervical spine, severing critical neural pathways. The force caused her head to strike the ground. She landed on her back in the gravel. Her arms and legs did not move. Her eyes remained open but unfocused. 2 workers saw the fall and ran toward her. One shouted for someone to call emergency services. The other knelt beside Hallie but did not move her. Blood pooled beneath her head. Her breathing became rapid and irregular, short gasps that grew weaker. Within 30 seconds, the agonal respiration ceased. One worker panicked and attempted compressions before pulling back, realizing the extent of the trauma. The compressions had no effect. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes. Paramedics found no pulse or respiratory effort. Her pupils were fixed and dilated. They pronounced her dead at the scene. The ladder remained where it had fallen. Investigators documented the site. They noted the absence of ladder stabilization and a loose gravel surface. Workers confirmed Hallie had entered without permission, dismissed safety warnings, and refused to follow protocols. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as high cervical fracture with spinal cord transection and secondary traumatic brain injury. The death was ruled accidental. No criminal charges were filed. The construction company paused work for 2 days while safety protocols were reviewed. It was September 3rd, 2017, at a large supermarket parking lot in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, USA. The late afternoon heat shimmered across the asphalt as shoppers pushed carts toward their cars, while vehicles moved slowly through the narrow lanes, searching for open spaces. Maris Caldwell, 43, had built a reputation among neighbors for turning small inconveniences into public confrontation. A dental hygienist by profession, she often filmed disputes on her phone and posted them online, believing she was exposing bad behavior in public spaces. Maris had been involved in several parking lot arguments over the years, frequently accusing other drivers of violating rules or showing disrespect. She drove a compact hybrid sedan covered in bumper stickers, promoting environmental responsibility and personal accountability. Maris arrived at the supermarket shortly after 4:30 p.m. and immediately became irritated when she saw a large pickup truck occupying part of 2 parking spaces near the entrance. The truck belonged to a construction worker who had parked slightly over the line due to the length of the vehicle. Instead of choosing another space, Maris parked nearby and began recording the truck with her phone while loudly narrating the situation. She accused the unseen driver of selfish behavior and announced she was documenting the violation for evidence. After several minutes, she decided to escalate the confrontation by attempting to block the truck from leaving. Maris positioned her car directly behind it and waited for the driver to return, continuing to film. When the truck's owner finally appeared pushing a cart of supplies, he ignored her commentary and began loading items into the truck bed. Maris approached him while still filming and demanded that he apologize for taking up 2 spaces. The driver calmly replied that he would be leaving shortly and suggested she move her vehicle. Instead, Maris continued arguing while standing beside the truck. As the man finished loading his items and prepared to leave, Maris grew visibly more agitated. Still recording, she removed the lid from a large iced drink she had been carrying and deliberately splashed the contents across the truck's tailgate and rear window, declaring the driver deserved to have his vehicle treated the same way he treated other people. The drink splashed across the truck and spilled onto the asphalt behind it, scattering ice cubes and water across the pavement. As Maris stepped backward to keep filming the driver's reaction, her foot landed directly on the melting ice and wet pavement she had just created. Her shoe slid suddenly on the melting ice and wet pavement, sending her backward onto the asphalt. The back of her head struck the pavement with severe force. Witnesses rushed toward her as she lay motionless beside the truck. The driver immediately called for help, while nearby shoppers attempted to assess her condition. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and transported Maris to a regional medical center. Doctors determined she had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury from the impact. Despite emergency treatment, the damage proved fatal, and Maris died later that evening. The county medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force head trauma resulting from the fall. Investigators confirmed the fall occurred after Maris spilled a drink onto the vehicle and slipped on the liquid that had pooled on the pavement. Parking lot surveillance cameras captured the entire incident. No charges were filed. Store management later installed additional parking signage and reminded customers to avoid confrontations in the parking lot. Maris's social media accounts, which had frequently featured videos of her public disputes, were removed by family members in the weeks following the incident. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, Click here. It was April 3rd, 2016. The morning air in Queens, New York carried the usual urban mix of exhaust and cooking smells, masking the danger that would claim 3 lives before noon. Tricia Volkoff, 51, owned 4 duplex units across Queens, inherited from her father's modest real estate portfolio. Over 15 years, she built a reputation among tenants and housing advocates for aggressive tactics, illegal lockouts, utility shutoffs, and intimidation aimed at silencing maintenance complaints. Property management collectives knew her for openly dismissing repair requests as freeloading. Her strategy was straightforward: make conditions intolerable so tenants left on their own, avoiding formal eviction proceedings. Tricia's properties featured aging gas lines, outdated electrical systems, and heating units that should have been replaced decades earlier. Other tenants said that she viewed maintenance requests as personal attacks on her business model. That morning, Tricia was targeting Kimberly Santos, a single mother living in Unit 2B with her 6-year-old son. Kimberly had filed multiple complaints about heating issues and requested repairs that would cost several $1,000s. Rather than address the problems, Tricia decided to shut off gas service to force them out. At 10:30 a.m., surveillance footage from a nearby bodega showed Tricia entering the basement utility area through the side service door, carrying bolt cutters and a small toolbox. The basement was poorly ventilated with stagnant air and no active exhaust, allowing gas to linger. Her online history showed she had researched the building's gas system and believed she could disconnect service to Unit 2B without affecting others. Instead of an apartment-specific line, she tampered with an exposed branch off the main gas riser, feeding the rear units, mistaking it for a shutoff. She spent several minutes loosening a corroded union fitting, noticed the gas odor intensifying, then left quickly, assuming it was a minor release that would dissipate without warning anyone or checking for leaks. Gas quickly spread into enclosed spaces above the basement, moving through wall cavities, stairwell chases, and into Unit 2B. Kimberly had left for lunch less than an hour earlier. Ignition sources in her apartment were limited to normal household appliances, including a refrigerator and a gas boiler with automatic relays. Poor ventilation and closed winter windows trapped the gas, allowing it to build to dangerous levels. Several tenants later reported a strong hallway odor, but assumed it was a brief maintenance issue and did not call 911. Around 11:25 a.m., Kimberly returned from lunch and moved quickly through the apartment without stopping to investigate the smell, later determined to have been masked by street food and boulevard exhaust. As she reached the kitchen, one of several possible ignition sources, later believed to include the refrigerator's thermostat cycling, produced a small electrical spark. The ignition occurred in the kitchen, triggering an explosion that sent a rapid pressure wave through adjacent gas-filled rooms, blew out interior walls, compromised load-bearing supports, and led to partial second-floor collapse, hurling debris into nearby storefronts. Tricia had returned minutes earlier to check her progress and was standing near the building's entrance when the blast occurred. The explosion threw her multiple feet into the street, where falling concrete crushed her chest and skull. Kimberly and her son, who had been in the kitchen, sustained unsurvivable injuries. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, but all 3 victims had injuries incompatible with survival. The medical examiner determined Tricia died from catastrophic blunt force trauma, internal organ rupture, and severe thermal injuries consistent with a gas explosion. The report concluded death occurred within seconds of the blast for all 3 victims. The investigation revealed years of unauthorized utility modifications across her properties, including tampered valves, mismatched fittings, and evidence of prior unpermitted shutoffs. The remaining tenants formed a housing cooperative and successfully sued Tricia's estate for damages. It was March 6, 2015, in Beaver Creek, Ohio. The afternoon shift at the grocery store on Fairfield Road was winding down the way it always did at that hour. The checkout lanes thinning out, the overhead lights humming over empty conveyor belts. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing was supposed to happen. Sharon Whitaker, 54, was a substitute teacher at an elementary school in the district. Friends and colleagues described her as someone who did not let things go. She was the kind of person who read the fine print, kept her receipts, and followed up on every complaint she ever filed. She was organized, and she was persistent, and she believed strongly that if something was wrong, it was worth saying so. That afternoon, she had driven to the store to pick up supplies for her daughter's birthday party the following weekend. Her daughter was turning 9, and Sharon had been planning the party for 2 weeks. She had a list, balloons in the colors her daughter had asked for, a chocolate cake mix, and the frosting to go with it, paper plates and napkins, and a bag of candy for the party games. She had worked it all out, and she knew roughly what it was going to cost. A few weeks earlier, she had clipped a coupon from the Sunday Circular. It was for a few dollars off a grocery purchase over a certain amount, and she had held on to it in the small zippered pocket of her purse specifically for this trip. She was not going to pay full price when she had a coupon. That was not how Sharon Whitaker did things. She loaded her items onto the belt, set her purse on the small ledge at the end of the register, and placed the coupon face up next to her loyalty card. The cashier picked it up, scanned it, and set it back down on the belt. The coupon had expired 3 weeks earlier. Sharon looked at it. She told the cashier that she had clipped it recently and that the store should honor it. The cashier explained that the system would not accept an expired coupon and that there was nothing she could do. Sharon asked for a manager. The cashier called for one over the intercom. While they waited, Sharon told the cashier that a little flexibility would go a long way, and that this was exactly the kind of thing that made people stop shopping at certain stores. The cashier kept her eyes on the register. The manager arrived a few minutes later. He was a man in his early 30s with a store lanyard and a patient expression that Sharon apparently did not find reassuring. He looked at the coupon. He confirmed it was expired. Sharon said the expiration date was printed so small that a person would need a magnifying glass to read it, and that this was a store problem, not a customer problem. She told him she had been shopping at this location for 11 years. She told him she spent a significant amount of money there every month. He offered her a small discount on a future purchase as a goodwill gesture. Sharon said that was not the same as honoring the coupon, and she did not accept it. She asked for the name of the shift supervisor. The manager stepped away from the register to make a phone call. Several minutes passed. The customers who had been waiting behind Sharon had quietly moved to other lanes. She remained where she was. When the manager came back, the answer was the same. The coupon could not be accepted. Sharon took a pen from her purse and wrote the supervisor's name on the back of the coupon. She told the manager that corporate would be hearing from her. She left her items on the belt and walked toward the exit. On her way out, she told the cashier that some people had no business working with the public. The entrance to the store had been mopped as part of routine floor cleaning during the late afternoon lull. A yellow wet floor sign had been placed in the center of the walkway just inside the sliding doors. Sharon had walked straight through it on her way out, kicking it aside with her foot without slowing down, muttering that it was in the way. The sign tipped and came to rest at an angle near the edge of the mat. The floor was still wet. The sign was no longer centered in the walkway. Sharon came back through the sliding doors just as immediately as she left. She had thought of something else she wanted to say. She came in fast, already talking, her eyes on the register at the far end of the lane. Her left foot came down on the damp tile just past the entrance mat. The sole of her shoe found no grip on the wet surface. Her foot went forward and her body went straight back. She had no time to react and nothing to grab onto. The back of her head struck the tile floor directly. The sound carried to the nearest checkout lane. She did not move after that. Staff called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Sharon unresponsive near the entrance. She was transported to a medical center where imaging confirmed a severe traumatic brain injury from the impact. She was admitted to intensive care. Sharon Whitaker died 2 days later without regaining consciousness. Her daughter's birthday party was never held that weekend. Investigators classified the incident as an accidental fall involving a displaced safety warning in a recently cleaned area. The incident was determined to be accidental, It was April 15th, 2015, at a community recreation center in Boulder, Colorado. Late afternoon light filtered through tall windows, stretching across polished hardwood floors lined with evenly spaced yoga mats. Ceiling fans hummed softly above the quiet murmur of participants settling into place for a beginner inversion workshop. Along one wall, reinforced padding had been installed specifically for supported headstand practice. 48-year-old Dexton Swale arrived early and positioned her mat directly in the center of the room, rather than near the padded wall area reserved for beginners. She owned a small retail business and was known among acquaintances for turning routine situations into confrontations. In previous classes, she had openly challenged instructors, correcting cues and dismissing safety reminders as overcautious. She often framed structured guidance as incompetence and had begun attending the workshop with the stated goal of proving that foundation drills were unnecessary for someone with her level of fitness. Over the prior weeks, she had ignored repeated recommendations to build shoulder strength and practice supported inversions first. During warm-ups that afternoon, she interrupted alignment corrections and questioned why experienced adults were being instructed in what she considered an overly simplified manner. Several participants shifted uncomfortably as the instructor calmly reiterated that unsupported headstands carried significant risk without proper conditioning and wall support. The instructor emphasized that falls from vertical alignment could drive axial force directly into the cervical spine. When the time came to practice, most students moved to the padded wall section. Dexton remained in the center of the hardwood floor rather than moving to the padded wall area. She declined foam blocks and brushed away the instructor's offer to spot her entry. Witnesses later stated that her tone had grown sharper as she insisted she did not need assistance. She planted her forearms and interlocked her fingers, placing the crown of her head on the floor. With a controlled kick upward, she lifted both legs into a freestanding headstand. For several seconds, she maintained vertical balance. Then her right elbow shifted slightly outward on the smooth surface, narrowing her base of support. Her hips drifted forward past center. Without wall contact to stop rotation, her body tipped beyond vertical. Witnesses reported that she attempted to correct by arching backward, but the adjustment accelerated the fall. Her full body weight drove downward as the top of her head struck the hardwood floor. Several participants later reported hearing a heavy impact followed by sudden silence. She collapsed immediately. Students described her eyes open and fixed for several seconds, but she did not move her arms or legs. Her breathing became shallow and irregular. The instructor stabilized her head and instructed others to call emergency services while preventing anyone from attempting to lift her. Responders arrived within 12 minutes and applied full spinal immobilization before transport. En route, she required assisted ventilation due to compromised respiratory effort. Hospital imaging later confirmed a severe fracture at the C1 to C2 level with spinal cord involvement near the brainstem. Despite surgical intervention and mechanical ventilation in intensive care, swelling at the injury site and confirmed spinal cord disruption resulted in loss of independent breathing. After 2 days on life support, Dexton Swale was pronounced deceased. Investigators documented that repeated safety warnings about unsupported inversions had been provided during the session. The medical examiner ruled the death an accidental recreational injury caused by complications of a high cervical spine fracture sustained during the fall.
It was November 8th, 2004. Central Paris buzzed with evening activity as restaurants and bars filled with locals and tourists seeking views from the city's many rooftop establishments. The temperature hovered around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, typical for early November, with clear skies offering unobstructed views of the illuminated Eiffel Tower in the distance. Monique Lefebvre, a 38-year-old marketing executive for a mid-sized advertising firm, had built a reputation in Parisian social circles for her confrontational behavior at upscale establishments. Colleagues described her as competent professionally but increasingly volatile in social, particularly after drinking. She'd been escorted from multiple venues over the past year, for arguing with staff and other patrons. Friends noted she seemed compelled to prove herself in situations where backing down would have been reasonable, often escalating minor disagreements into public scene. That evening, Monique had attended a client dinner at a restaurant 3 blocks from the Rooftop venue, where she would later visit. Staff at the dinner noted she consumed at least 4 glasses of wine during the 2-hour meal, her speech becoming noticeably slurred. She'd mentioned wanting to visit a specific rooftop bar known for its panoramic city views, convincing 2 colleagues to accompany her despite their concern her visible intoxication. The trio arrived at the upscale rooftop establishment around 9:45. The venue, located on the 5th floor of a historic building, featured a wraparound terrace with a metal guardrail, whose top rail stood about 3.5 feet above the terrace floor and included a lower horizontal mid-rail and a shallow foot ledge that made footholds possible. The host immediately assessed Monique's condition and politely refused service, citing the establishment's policy regarding intoxicated patrons. Monique became belligerent, insisting she was fine and demanding to speak with management. Witnesses saw Monique arguing with staff for nearly 10 minutes, while her colleagues attempted to persuade her to leave. The manager arrived and repeated the service refusal. Rather than accepting the decision, Monique turned toward the terrace railing, announcing she would prove she wasn't too drunk by demonstrating her balance. Staff attempted calm restraint at arm's length and called for security. Monique began climbing over the safety barrier, placing 1 foot on the lower mid-rail while gripping the top. Multiple witnesses, including her colleagues and restaurant patrons, shouted warnings as she swung her second leg over. For approximately 3 seconds, she balanced awkwardly on the exterior side of the railing, facing inward toward the restaurant. Then her hands slipped from the metal railing. Monique fell backward into the open air, dropping 5 stories before striking a lower terrace approximately 55 feet. Her body hit concrete flooring and metal outdoor furniture with devastating. The impact was visible to several dozen people dining on adjacent. She landed on her back and side, her body immediately. A restaurant manager from the lower terrace called emergency services in 30 seconds. Paramedics arrived about 8 minutes after the call, but could only pronounce Monique dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report documented multiple spinal fractures, 14 broken ribs, a shattered pelvis, severe skull fracture, and massive internal bleeding from lacerated liver and spleen. The establishment's security footage was reviewed by police and insurance investigators, confirming witness account. Management implemented stricter intoxication screening protocols and installed additional signage warning patrons about climbing on railing. Monique's colleagues later spoke publicly about her pattern of refusing to accept reasonable safety, describing the incident as tragically predictable in her history of escalation.
It was July 14th, 2015. The Bruce Highway stretched through Queensland's Sunshine Coast under strong midday sun as peak hour traffic moved steadily northbound. Marissa Diaz, a 38-year-old real estate clerk from Brisbane, merged her compact SUV into the center lane, towing a Caravan she'd purchased 3 months earlier. Friends said that Marissa had bought the used Caravan immediately after her divorce finalized, eager to start fresh with weekend getaways. She worked for a mid-sized property management firm, processing rental applications and fielding tenant complaints for modest pay. They described her as impulsive and cost-conscious to a fault. The Caravan purchase reflected both traits. She'd paid cash to avoid financing fees and declined the dealer's recommended safety inspection to save $200. The previous owner had warned her about rust damage around the hitch assembly, but Marissa dismissed it as cosmetic. She'd towed the Caravan only twice before, both times on quiet suburban roads. Caravanning requires understanding weight distribution, hitch capacity, and proper safety chain installation. The chains serve as backup if the primary coupling fails, designed to keep the Caravan attached during mechanical failure. Marissa had done neither. A later mechanical inspection would reveal severe pitting and a fractured shear bolt on the coupling. Safety chains had been routed through a non-structural mount and were corroded. That afternoon, Marissa was relocating the Caravan to a coastal campground she'd reserved online. Traffic was moderate but moving fast, most vehicles cruising at 60 miles per hour. At approximately 1:15 in the afternoon, a commercial truck driver attempted to merge ahead of her. Marissa accelerated aggressively, blocking the merge. The truck driver sounded his horn twice. Marissa responded by brake checking once, tapping her pedal hard enough to flash her brake lights. The Caravan lurched, but held. The truck driver backed off, but Marissa wasn't finished. 30 seconds later, she brake checked again, harder this time. The Caravan swayed violently, fishtailing slightly before stabilizing. Multiple drivers noticed the erratic behavior. Several reached for their dash cams, anticipating trouble. The truck driver maintained distance, but Marissa's anger hadn't subsided. At 1:18 in the afternoon, Marissa slammed her brakes a third time with full force. The corroded hitch assembly, already weakened by metal fatigue and repeated oscillation stress from the earlier brake events, fractured completely. The coupling separated instantly. The safety chains, corroded and attached to non-structural mounts, snapped under the sudden 2,000-pound shock load when the coupling failed. The Caravan broke free. The 15-foot Caravan veered left, jackknifing across 2 lanes into oncoming southbound traffic. Its nose swung unpredictably as the tongue separated, causing it to yaw violently. A sedan swerved violently right, clipping a motorcycle. The motorcycle rider went down, sliding across asphalt. 2 more cars collided trying to avoid the careening Caravan, which finally tipped onto its side, blocking both southbound lanes. Behind Marissa, the commercial truck driver locked his brakes. However, the 18-ton truck could not stop in time due to limited emergency braking distance at 53 miles per hour. The truck struck Marissa's SUV at 53 miles per hour. The rear cabin collapsed inward under high-speed rear intrusion forces, the impact crushing everything from the back seats forward. Marissa's torso and skull were compressed forward as the rear structure intruded and the driver's seatback failed under impact load. She died instantly, her body pinned in the wreckage. Police alongside paramedics arrived minutes later, following an emergency call from one of the motorists. They closed both directions of the Bruce Highway for 6 hours. The coroner recorded massive blunt force injuries to Marissa's head and chest incompatible with life. 11 vehicles were involved in the chain reaction collision. Investigators seized SD cards, matched GPS timestamps, and synchronized 7 separate dashcam clips to reconstruct the sequence. The Caravan was impounded and eventually scrapped. It was October 2015 in Rutherford County, Tennessee. The fellowship hall was warm and brightly lit, the kind of room that always smells like coffee and folding tables regardless of what's being served. It was a mild fall afternoon, around 64 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and most members had driven short distances with their dishes already prepared. The hall had no commercial refrigeration. Dishes were held on warming trays or left at room temperature, the same setup the congregation had used for years without incident. Ann Ketterman was 58, a longtime church member who had gradually and informally taken control of the monthly potluck over a period of years. She had no food handling certification, no culinary training, nothing that would give her authority in any official sense. But she had presence, and she had been doing this long enough that people had stopped pushing back. Every dish got looked at before it hit the table. Every dish got an opinion. I've known people like Anne, not in a church context, but in offices, in group settings, where someone decides the rules should run through them first. It's a very specific kind of person, and I think most people have a face in their head right now. That month, a woman named Maureen Abels brought a green bean casserole. Maureen was 67 and had been a member of that congregation for over 2 decades. She had made the same dish, the same way, for years. Anne rejected it in front of other members. The texture was wrong. The temperature was off. She sent Maureen back to reheat it, then sent her back again, then directed her to scrap it and remake it using Anne's own instruction, which included a low, slow reheat in a covered dish that sat in the church kitchen for 2 hours before being brought back out. I want to be precise about that, because it's not incidental. It's the whole mechanism. Here's what I didn't fully understand until I went through the food safety documentation. Clostridium botulinum thrives in low-acid, low-oxygen environments. Exactly what you get inside a covered cream-based casserole repeatedly warmed and cooled without reaching a temperature high enough to neutralize it. Botulinum toxin is destroyed by sufficient heat. The original dish, prepared and served in a single pass, didn't create the same conditions for toxin development. The remake did. 2 hours in a covered dish on a low warmer can keep food in a temperature range where the toxin isn't destroyed, not hot enough to neutralize it, and not cold enough to slow bacterial activity. Nobody designed it that way. That's what makes it so hard to look away from. Anne was the first to serve herself from the final version. The potluck continued, and nobody reported feeling unwell that afternoon. That's consistent with how botulism toxin, it doesn't present immediately. Between 18 and 36 hours later, Anne began experiencing fatigue and blurred vision. By the following day, she had difficulty swallowing and a drooping heaviness in her face and neck that moved downward through her limbs. She believed she had a stomach bug. By the time a family member found her unable to stand and called for help, the toxin had progressed to a point where early intervention was no longer straightforward. The detail that hits hardest when I go back through this is that Maureen ate from the original dish, so did at least one other member served before Anne intervened. Neither of them got sick. Health authorities tested both versions. The original returned clean, the remake did not. That result is documented. It's not ambiguous. Anne died in hospital care 4 days after the potluck. Confirmed cause was botulism toxin poisoning. Food samples from both versions were tested and the findings were clear. Congregation members were interviewed, Maureen among them. No negligence was assigned to her. Everything in the remake had been done under Anne's direct instruction. The case closed without further action. The original dish was fine. I've read that finding several times, and I still don't quite know what to do with it. She rejected something that was fine, replaced it with something that wasn't, and was the first person to eat it. It was July 11th, 2018. The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass facade of the luxury high-rise in downtown Miami as Barbara Flint stood on her 42nd floor balcony, surveying the streaked windows that had been bothering her for months. Barbara had built her reputation as the building's most notorious holdout, a retired insurance adjuster who had purchased her corner unit in 2009. She viewed any shared expense as an assault on individual property rights. Previous colleagues said that her background in claims investigation had made her naturally suspicious of contractors and service providers, leading her to challenge every building expense from elevator maintenance to landscaping. High-rise window cleaning demands specialized training and equipment to manage extreme winds and height risks. Professional crews rely on industrial harnesses, redundant safety systems, and weather monitoring. Despite repeated warnings from the building management about safety and insurance liability, Barbara dismissed them as corporate fear-mongering to justify costly service contracts. That morning, Barbara set up a self-devised safety system using second-hand climbing gear she had bought online 5 years earlier, including a harness, carabiners, and static rope stored in a humid unit without proper inspection. Despite high wind advisories for Miami, with gusts up to 35 miles per hour by midday, she was determined to finish before the building's cleaning crew arrived. Barbara planned to anchor herself to the balcony railing and lean outward with an extended squeegee, mistakenly treating the railing as a load-rated anchor. Security footage showed her testing the rope and carabiners, but she likely lacked understanding of fall forces or equipment inspection. Despite her inexperience, she proceeded confidently while preparing her cleaning supplies. Barbara stepped over the balcony railing and began cleaning the first window panel. The building's security cameras captured her preparation and movements from angles covering the balcony and immediate exterior, though much of her lateral motion across the building was only partially visible as she worked her way across the building's exterior. Her movements became tentatively more confident with each window, though unsteady compared with a trained professional. The wind had been steadily increasing throughout the morning, creating additional stress on her improvised anchor system that she failed to recognize or account for. As Barbara leaned outward to reach a particularly stubborn streak on the glass, the primary carabiner connecting her harness to the anchor rope failed catastrophically due to corrosion and improper cross-loading under the combined forces of her body weight and the wind load. Barbara plummeted immediately, her body striking 3 lower balconies before impacting the concrete courtyard after approximately 5 seconds of fall time over 400 feet below. Multiple residents witnessed the fall and immediately called emergency services. The first responders arrived within 8 minutes, but Barbara's injuries were incompatible with life. The building's security director had watched the entire incident unfold on the monitoring system and provided detailed footage to investigators, but wasn't released publicly. The courtyard area was immediately cordoned off as emergency crews worked to secure the scene. The medical examiner determined that Barbara died from massive blunt force trauma, including multiple skull fractures, complete spinal cord transection, and catastrophic internal organ damage. The impact had been instantaneous and unsurvivable. The building's management company implemented mandatory safety compliance inspections following Barbara's death, prohibiting residents from performing exterior maintenance work. Her estate was subsequently billed for 3 years of unpaid maintenance fees, which were deducted from the proceeds of her unit sale to cover the building's legal and cleanup costs. It was July 4th, 2016, in Riverbend, Wisconsin, USA. During the town's annual Independence Day parade, streets were lined with cheering crowds behind rope barriers as balloons drifted unpredictably in gusts up to 15 miles per hour. Gloria Winslow, 51, was known in Riverbend for attending city council and school board meetings, not for children in the system, but for enjoying a public voice. She had run unsuccessfully for local office twice and managed a small insurance office where staff saw her as meticulous, argumentative, and prone to escalate minor complaints. Gloria held strict opinions on public behavior, often treating shared spaces as stages for moral enforcement. She had once been asked to leave a family entertainment venue for confronting a birthday party and habitually stood with arms crossed and chin raised, a posture co-workers nicknamed the Gloria. Floats moved along Main Street at roughly 3 to 5 miles per hour, some extending several feet beyond their towing vehicle. Spectators were expected to remain behind rope barrier as volunteers kept the route clear. Wind pushed balloon and lightweight decorations unpredictably toward the crowd. 4-year-old Nolan Prescott stood with his mother, holding a large red star-shaped helium balloon purchased from a vendor. Nolan bounced excitedly as the balloon floated above the rope barrier. Gloria, standing nearby, had already complained about the crowd standing too close and about teenagers blocking her view. When the balloon drifted near her face again, she snapped at Nolan's mother to control the child, then suddenly snatched the balloon string from Nolan's hand, causing him to cry. Still lecturing the mother about public behavior, Gloria stepped backward while holding the balloon, moving toward the rope barrier that had briefly gone slack when a volunteer shifted position. At that moment, float number 7, a large flatbed truck carrying a community display, passed directly beside them. The decorative platform extended about 3 feet beyond the vehicle on the crowd side. Still focused on the argument and holding Nolan's balloon, Gloria stepped backward past the rope barrier and into the active parade lane without looking. The float struck her at hip height on her left side. Though moving slowly, the combined mass of truck and float totaled roughly 8,400 pounds. The impact knocked her to the ground, partially under the platform. The rear wheels missed her body, but part of the float's metal frame struck across her upper chest and neck as the driver moved forward several feet before stopping. The impact fractured her sternum, broke 4 ribs on the left side, 2 puncturing her left lung, and caused severe trauma to her larynx. Gloria remained conscious, but struggled to breathe as a nurse in the crowd rushed forward and assessed her condition, noting labored breathing and wet, gurgling sounds consistent with a collapsed lung and internal bleeding. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and airlifted Gloria to a regional hospital in Riverbend. She died in surgery from internal hemorrhage and respiratory failure. Multiple videos from cell phones and parade cameras documented her stepping past the barrier and taking the balloon. The county medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt chest trauma, leading to internal bleeding and respiratory failure. Even at low speeds, the vehicle's mass made contact fatal, and investigators noted that Gloria had stepped past the safety barrier and into the active parade lane moments before impact. Nolan was unharmed, though he asked about his balloon for days afterward. His mother was cleared of any wrongdoing. Parade organizers added additional barrier lines and increased volunteer coverage for future events. Gloria's estate was handled by her 2 adult children, and co-workers held a small memorial, acknowledging privately that her tendency to argue in public made the outcome tragically unsurprising. It was June 12, 2016, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Tampa, Florida. The afternoon heat pressed down on the residential streets as families retreated indoors to escape the humidity. Inside a modest 2-story home, 49-year-old Vintel Lewis was preparing what she believed would be an educational demonstration for her online followers. Vintel worked in home decor resale and had built a reputation for being outspoken about consumer issues. She frequently posted videos challenging what she saw as corporate deception, often filming confrontations with service technicians. The attention, both supportive and critical, fueled her growing online presence and reinforced her confidence in her own conclusions. Days earlier, Vintel confronted the appliance repair technician inside her kitchen while recording on her phone. She accused him of inflating service costs by exaggerating safety risks and insisted she would expose what she described as dishonest industry practices. When he explained that operating a microwave with its outer casing removed could result in lethal electrocution, particularly from the high-voltage capacitor that can retain charge even after being unplugged, she repeatedly interrupted him and demanded technical proof beyond manufacturer warnings. The technician declined to proceed after she refused to sign the required liability waiver for internal servicing. Later that evening, she uploaded edited footage of the exchange, framing the warning as a scare tactic designed to pressure customers into unnecessary repairs. In the comment section, she encouraged viewers to question appliance safety guidelines and stated she would demonstrate that the risk was overstated. That afternoon, she set up recording equipment in her kitchen and prepared to recreate the scenario. Using a screwdriver, she removed the microwave's outer shell, exposing internal wiring, the transformer, and the high-voltage capacitor. Safety labels were clearly visible along the metal chassis. She then deliberately bypassed the door interlock switch, the mechanism designed to prevent operation when the door is open, believing it existed to restrict performance rather than protect users. Her adult daughter stood several feet away, filming from a second angle as Vintel leaned toward the exposed circuitry. The kitchen light reflected sharply off the bare metal components, now energized and unshielded. With the camera rolling, Vintel placed a metal bowl inside the open microwave cavity and activated the unit. Almost immediately, electrical arcing formed inside the exposed chassis. A sharp snapping sound followed as insulation began to fail and light smoke rose from the wiring. Instead of stepping back, Vintel reached toward the exposed transformer while it remained energized. Her hand made contact with wiring carrying over 2,000 volts. The current locked her muscles, causing her to collapse onto the tile floor. She gasped and convulsed as the shock disrupted her heart's rhythm. Video later reviewed by investigators showed brief, involuntary movement before she became unresponsive. Her daughter rushed to shut off the power as smoke thickened near the ceiling. Insulation near the transformer began to smolder, producing additional smoke but remaining confined to the internal wiring area. By the time the power was cut, Vintel lay motionless beside the appliance. Emergency services were called immediately. Fire crews arrived within 8 minutes, containing the localized kitchen fire before it spread beyond the immediate area. Resuscitation efforts began on scene. According to the incident report, she entered ventricular fibrillation and did not regain a stable rhythm despite advanced life support. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. Investigators later confirmed the safety interlock had been deliberately bypassed and the high-voltage system energized during contact. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from cardiac arrhythmia triggered by electrocution. The incident was ruled accidental, noting that factory safety mechanism had been intentionally disabled. It was August 2015 and the scorching California sun had turned a Bakersfield parking lot into a furnace with asphalt temperatures exceeding 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The late afternoon heat created visible waves rising from the pavement, while the air shimmered with oppressive intensity. Traffic moved steadily through the busy commercial area as shoppers hurried between air-conditioned buildings. Angela Rook, a 41-year-old delivery contractor, known for her hostile temperament and verbally abusive behavior towards strangers, had parked her van in the lot while running errands. Her aggressive personality and confrontational attitude had earned her a reputation for explosive outbursts when challenged. Inside the vehicle, she had left her toddler and a medium-sized dog despite the extreme heat conditions. Several concerned bystanders had noticed the child and animal inside the closed vehicle and began shouting warnings toward Angela as she emerged from a nearby store. The van's windows were only slightly cracked, providing minimal ventilation against the deadly heat that was rapidly building inside. Witnesses estimated that the interior temperature could have reached dangerous levels within minutes. Angela responded to the bystanders' concerns with characteristic hostility, screaming threats and accusations at those who had dared to interfere with her business. Her aggressive reaction escalated the situation as more people gathered, expressing alarm about the welfare of the child and animal trapped in the increasingly dangerous conditions. During the confrontation, the dog managed to push open a rear door that had failed to latch properly when Angela had closed it earlier, a mechanical defect she had been meaning to repair. The animal's frantic pawing at the faulty door caused it to swing open, and the dog immediately bolted across the parking lot, running directly into the path of moving traffic as it sought cooler ground. Angela reacted instantly to her pet's escape, sprinting across multiple traffic lanes without regard for the vehicles moving through the area. The superheated asphalt radiated intense heat as she ran, and her foot caught the raised edge of a concrete wheel stop. She slipped and fell directly in front of a pickup truck that was traveling through the parking lot at normal speed. The driver had no time to react to her sudden appearance in the vehicle's path. The pickup truck, traveling approximately 15 to 20 miles per hour, struck Angela as she fell, its front tire rolling over her upper torso with devastating force. The weight of the vehicle caused severe blunt force trauma to the chest, resulting in multiple rib fractures, lung contusions, and catastrophic internal injuries. Angela remained motionless on the superheated pavement as the pickup truck came to an immediate stop. The driver immediately called for emergency assistance while other witnesses rushed to provide aid. However, the severity of the crushing injuries made any intervention impossible. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Angela was pronounced dead at the scene. The combination of massive chest trauma and internal bleeding had caused immediate and irreversible damage. The medical team also attended to the toddler, who was treated for heat exposure but survived. Investigators documented the sequence of events through witness statements from multiple bystanders who had observed the confrontation and accident. Security cameras from nearby businesses captured portions of the incident. The medical examiner confirmed that death resulted from vehicular trauma, specifically crushing injuries to the chest and internal organs. Police investigators determined that the pickup truck driver had been operating appropriately and could not have avoided the collision. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now. It was March 18, 2015. The loading bay of an industrial warehouse in central Ohio hummed with its usual midday rhythm. Overhead, fluorescents cast harsh light across concrete floors marked with faded yellow pedestrian lanes. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and cardboard dust. Forklifts moved in practiced patterns, their reverse alarms chirping in steady intervals. Pallets stacked with metal components, each weighing close to 2,000 pounds, waited near the shipping dock. Leah Manning was 44 years old. She worked as a logistics coordinator, a desk role that involved routing shipments and managing inventory reports. She had no certification to operate floor equipment. Colleagues described her as confrontational and entitled, someone who believed her office position gave her authority over floor operations. She routinely dismissed safety protocols, arguing that warehouse rules didn't apply to management staff. That afternoon, she was tracking down a discrepancy in a pallet count. The loading bay was busy. 3 forklifts were in motion, repositioning pallets for an outbound truck. Security cameras mounted on the ceiling recorded the standard flow of operations. Operators wore high-visibility vests and followed protocol, checking mirrors and blind spots before maneuvering. Leah entered the bay from the office corridor. She moved aggressively across the floor, ignoring the painted pedestrian lanes entirely. A forklift operator was repositioning a pallet of steel brackets near a support column. The load, elevated on the forks, blocked the operator's rear view entirely. The machine began reversing. Its alarm sounded. Leah stepped directly into the path, positioning herself between the reversing forklift and the column. When the operator gestured for her to move, Leah waved dismissively and planted herself more firmly in position. She shouted that she worked there and knew what she was doing. The forklift moved backward approximately 1 to 2 feet. The operator felt the engine load abruptly and heard a dull impact resonate through the chassis. He stopped immediately. The rear counterweight, a solid block of cast iron weighing over 1,000 pounds, had pinned Leah against the steel column. The force compressed her pelvis, fracturing the pelvic ring and rupturing the pelvic vasculature. Leah let out a brief, involuntary gasp and remained upright as shock began to set in. Her expression shifted, confusion replacing defiance. For several seconds, she stayed on her feet, awareness fading in waves. Her knees buckled when operator immediately neutralized the forklift, set the brake, and dismounted, reaching for his radio. Leah collapsed onto the concrete. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her. She remained dimly conscious for several more seconds, her breathing shallow and erratic, before the catastrophic hemorrhage pulled her under completely. The operator radioed for help, his voice shaking slightly. Other workers rushed over, but did not move her. Emergency services were called at 1:47 p.m. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes. No pulse or signs of life were detected. She was pronounced dead at 2:03 p.m. Investigators reviewed footage from multiple security cameras positioned throughout the bay. The combined angles showed Leah bypassing safety protocols, confronting the operator, and refusing to move when warned. The reverse alarm was clearly audible. The operator had followed standard procedures. No mechanical failure was found. The footage was not released to the public at the family's request and due to its graphic nature. The county medical examiner listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma with pelvic crush injury and internal bleeding. No criminal charges were filed. The warehouse resumed operations the following day. It was October 23, 2013. The dining room of an upscale bistro in Paris's 8th arrondissement hummed with evening conversation and clinking silverware. Colette Braun, a 49-year-old luxury retail buyer, sat at table 14, her face tight with displeasure as she prepared to send her entree back for the 3rd time that evening. Colette had built a career sourcing high-end fashion accessories for an international luxury goods conglomerate. She traveled constantly between Paris, Milan, and New York, negotiating with manufacturers and attending trade shows. Her colleagues described her as exacting and difficult. Over 15 years, she had developed a reputation for publicly humiliating service workers, retail staff, and restaurant employees. That evening, Colette had arrived at 8 expecting perfection. When her steak arrived, medium well, instead of medium rare, she sent it back with comments about the chef's competence loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The second attempt was too rare. The third was met with accusations of deliberate sabotage. Diners shifted uncomfortably. The manager apologized repeatedly, but Colette escalated. She called the kitchen staff incompetent amateurs and demanded to speak directly to the chef. When staff explained the chef was working and couldn't leave the line during dinner service, Colette stood abruptly. She announced she would deliver her feedback personally. The manager positioned himself near the kitchen door and called a second staff member for backup, explaining that dining room guests were prohibited in the kitchen for safety and health regulations. 2 authorized personnel only signs were visible on the swinging door. Colette lunged past them suddenly, taking advantage of a narrow doorway and the staff being momentarily distracted, ignoring their warnings about active cooking zones and slippery floors. The kitchen was controlled chaos. Sauté pans flamed, orders barked between stations. A prep cook had spilled vegetable oil near the main cooking line minutes earlier and was actively spreading absorbent material while trying to stay clear of diners, leaving the hazard partially exposed. She marched directly toward the head chef, her expensive heels clicking against tile. She was mid-sentence when her right heel hit the oil slick first. Her feet went out from under her instantly. There was no chance to catch herself. She fell backward with complete force. Her body weight shifted entirely backward over the oil, making recovery impossible. Her arms flailed uselessly. The back of her skull struck the tile floor with a sound the sous chef later described as similar to dropping a melon. The impact was witnessed by 7 kitchen staff members who immediately stopped working and stepped back. Blood began spreading rapidly across the white tile beneath her head. Her body convulsed once, then went still. The head chef called emergency services at 8:47 in the evening. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes, but Colette showed no signs of consciousness. She was pronounced dead at the hospital at 9:38. The forensic medical report identified a severe occipital skull fracture with immediate brain hemorrhage. The cause of death was blunt force head trauma resulting from the fall. The medical report described the impact as immediately fatal. The restaurant provided psychological counseling for staff members who witnessed the accident. A labor and safety inspector visited the following day to review protocols and document the incident. No charges were filed. Colette's luxury retail company issued a brief internal memo and quietly filled her position within 3 weeks.
It was June 22, 2015. The lobby of a mid-tier business hotel in Orlando, Florida, gleamed with polished Italian marble flooring. The afternoon heat had driven guests inside, where air conditioning battled the humidity that construction workers tracked in pool renovation. Cynthia Morais, a 46-year-old regional for a national pharmaceutical distribution, had built her career on aggressive negotiation and an unwavering belief in her own importance. Her performance reviews consistently noted her results-driven approach, though human resources had fielded 17 complaints about her treatment of subordinate and service staff over 3 years. They described her as someone who viewed courtesy as weakness and compromise as failure. Her management style relied heavily on public confrontation and escalating situations until she received preferential treatment. That afternoon, Cynthia arrived expecting immediate processing despite holding a standard reservation. The front desk clerk explained that her room would be ready within minutes and asked her to wait briefly while they completed final preparation. The 3-minute delay triggered an explosive response. Hotel check-in procedures typically require 5 to 8 minutes during busy periods, a time frame Cynthia found unacceptable. She demanded an immediate upgrade, her voice escalating as other guests watched uncomfortably. The housekeeping supervisor had placed multiple wet floor signs along the marble pathway leading from the entrance to the front desk, clearly visible barriers that most guests navigated carefully. Cynthia ignored them entirely, focused on her confrontation with increasingly uncomfortable staff member. She grabbed an oversized luggage cart, maneuvering it aggressively through the lobby while continuing her tirade about unacceptable service standards. The cart's front wheel caught in a seam between marble tiles, causing a sudden backward pull. Her leather-soled stiletto heels found no traction on the water-slicked marble. She stepped directly into a wet section, her momentum carrying her forward as both feet lost purchase simultaneously. The heavy luggage cart offered no stability as she fell backward, her body twisting as she attempted to catch herself. Cynthia struck a protruding granite counter ledge roughly 42 inches high with the back of her head at full falling velocity. The impact was devastating. Witnesses heard a heavy thud against the counter, and a long scalp laceration along the occiput produced visible blood pooling on the marble. Unconsciousness came in. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, showing clear signs of severe neurological trauma. The front desk clerk activated emergency protocols within seconds, calling emergency services immediately. 2 hotel guests with medical training attempted jaw thrust maneuvers, applied direct pressure to the scalp wound, delivered supplemental oxygen, and held manual cervical stabilization. EMS arrived, though the severity of it largely. Paramedics arrived 12 minutes, finding Cynthia responsive, obvious skull fracture and massive. She was transported to a regional trauma center, intubated en route, but never regained consciousness. The medical examiner determined death resulted from severe blunt force trauma, causing a basilar skull fracture, subdural hematoma, and catastrophic brain swelling. Hotel management reviewed security footage confirming Cynthia had bypassed 4 separate wet floor warnings before the accident. Staff members from other hotels reported her history of similar confrontational behavior to be a stay. Her funeral 3 days later drew a modest, primarily colleagues fulfilling professional obligations rather than personal connections formed through years of caustic.
It was April 9th, 2016, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The backyard had been set up since mid-morning. Pastel balloons tied to the backs of folding chairs, a table with snacks and a decorated cake, and at the center of it, all a short section of PVC pipe mounted on a wooden base, loaded and ready. Ashley Monroe, 41, ran a parenting blog that she had been building for 4 years. She posted DIY projects, setups, family milestones, and the kind of carefully framed moments that looked effortless but took most of a Saturday to arrange. She had around 8,000 regular readers and a loyal following on social media. This was her 3rd child, and she wanted the reveal to be the best one yet. Something dramatic, something her readers would share. She'd been planning it for 3 weeks, and everything was going to go exactly the way she had pictured it, and she was very clear about that. By the morning of the party, Ashley wasn't just organizing, she was directing. She corrected how the chairs were spaced, adjusted decorations other people had already set. When a relative suggested a simpler option, Ashley shut it down immediately. She said she wasn't doing basic for something this important. She had found a tutorial online for a homemade confetti cannon made from PVC pipe. The basic version used a manual pump or a small balloon. Ashley had found a modified version in the comments that used a CO2 cartridge for a bigger, faster burst. Several people said it worked perfectly. A few said not to do it. Ashley didn't just scroll past the warnings. She dismissed them out loud, calling them overdramatic and saying people online love to exaggerate risks when they didn't know what they were doing. Her husband was a mechanical engineer. When she showed him the design, he looked it over carefully and said he was not comfortable with it. He explained that consumer-grade PVC pipe was not designed to handle compressed gas, and that introducing a CO2 cartridge into a sealed section with glued joints could cause the pipe to fail under pressure. He told her she should use something made for the purpose. It would be safer, and it would still look good on camera. Ashley didn't take that as advice. She took it as pushback. She cut him off midway through his explanation and told him that plenty of people had used the exact same setup without any issues, and that she wasn't going to ruin the aesthetic with something bulky or store-bought. When he tried to explain further, she rolled her eyes and said not everything needed to turn into one of his technical lectures, especially over something this simple. He also told her again that it wasn't about opinion. It was about how the material behaved under pressure. Ashley responded by telling him he was overthinking it and making a problem where there wasn't one. She added that this was her event, her blog, and she knew what she was doing. She had spent 3 weeks planning this, and she was not changing it at the last minute because he was being cautious. This wasn't up for debate. She picked the device back up and said if he was not going to help, he could find somewhere else to be useful until the guests arrived. He stood there for a moment longer, watching her. Then he stepped away. The pipe was standard, consumer-grade PVC intended for household plumbing. It was not rated for compressed gas under any conditions. The joints were bonded with standard PVC adhesive. There was no pressure gauge. There was no relief valve. Nothing to regulate or limit what happened inside the pipe once the cartridge released. The only thing standing between the stored energy and the backyard was the pipe wall and the glued connections holding it together. Guests gathered and the phones went up. Ashley positioned herself right beside the device rather than stepping behind it, turning her body slightly toward the cameras so she would stay in frame. She reached for the trigger. There was no meaningful warning, nothing anyone could react to. she triggered the mechanism. The cartridge punctured and released rapidly into the sealed chamber, causing pressure to spike within a fraction of a second to a level the pipe was never built to survive. The glued joint near the base gave out first. The pipe shattered, sending rigid PVC shards outward at high velocity in every direction. Ashley was standing directly beside the failure point and slightly above it. A shard struck her in the face and head. The force of the fragmentation at that distance caused severe traumatic injury immediately. She collapsed as confetti dispersed around her. Guests called 911 immediately as people rushed to help and moved the children away. She was taken to a medical center, but despite surgery, she died from severe head trauma caused by high-velocity PVC shrapnel. Investigators examined the device and concluded the incident resulted from introducing unregulated compressed CO2 into a system built from non-pressure rated PVC materials with no pressure controls of any kind. The incident was ruled accidental. It was May 25, 2018, along Florida's Gulf Coast. Memorial Day weekend had brought record crowds to a popular marine aquarium. Families filled the exhibits under bright afternoon sun, with temperatures in the mid-80s, creating ideal conditions for outdoor attractions and scheduled presentations. 50-year-old Clarette Dawn arrived with her extended family during Memorial Day weekend, dressed in a lightweight cover-up over swim-ready attire. A travel content creator, she frequently filmed immersive destination reviews for her online audience, often seeking closer access than typical visitors. Her family was accustomed to her tendency to test policy boundaries when she believed guest restrictions were negotiable rather than absolute. The aquarium's main attraction was a large dolphin habitat used for scheduled educational presentations. Prominent signage stated that guest interaction and platform access were restricted to trained personnel only. Waist-high barriers separated visitors from the water, and alarmed, self-latching gates secured the staff-only walkways above the pool, which extended more than 15 feet at its deepest point. Clarette had researched dolphin swim programs offered at similar facilities and anticipated she might be able to arrange closer access for her channel. When staff explained that interactive programs required advance booking and were not included with general admission, she argued that as a paying guest, she should be allowed limited platform access for filming. She maintained that supervised entry for content creation was a reasonable request and believed the restriction was flexible rather than absolute. Security responded as visitors paused to watch. While staff attempted to de-escalate, a marine trainer exited through a staff-only gate to reposition equipment. As the gate closed behind him, Clarette quickly followed before it fully latched, stepping onto the restricted platform above the water. Witnesses shouted warnings. Trainers radioed for emergency response while moving toward her. Ignoring repeated instructions to return, she moved farther along the narrow walkway, continuing her live stream. When security reached the secured gate, they had to wait for controlled access from inside. Without authorization, Clarette lowered herself from the platform's edge and dropped into the pool, feet first, without flotation support. Witness footage later showed her striking the back of her head against the concrete edge during entry before submerging. The impact and sudden immersion left her visibly disoriented. Although the water was not dangerously cold, she surfaced breathing hard and looking around as if unsure where the nearest exit ladder was located. Her movements appeared unsteady as her breathing became increasingly frantic against the smooth habitat walls. During repeated attempts to breathe, she aspirated water and submerged. When she resurfaced, her movements appeared slowed and poorly coordinated. Staff deployed flotation devices while a designated rescue diver entered from a controlled ladder. Within approximately 90 seconds, responders reached her as she slipped beneath the surface again. She was lifted from the pool as personnel initiated CPR on the deck. Paramedics transported her to a nearby hospital. Physicians later determined she sustained a head injury during entry and subsequently aspirated water while disoriented, resulting in prolonged oxygen deprivation and hypoxic brain injury. Despite advanced life support, she did not recover. The investigation concluded she had bypassed barriers, followed authorized personnel through a secured access point, ignored instructions, and entered a restricted habitat without authorization. A safety review confirmed that circulation systems, intake cover, alarms, and infrastructure met regulatory standards. The death was ruled accidental following unauthorized entry into a restricted area. After required inspections and coordination with authorities, the dolphin exhibit resumed operations. Portions of her live stream were reviewed as part of the official report, documenting the sequence of events preceding the incident.